All right, here we go with, I feel like I need a drum roll. This will be Season 3's Episode 1. It is Episode 89, and it has been a long time coming. I can only apologize at this point that it's taken this long to get Season 3 launched. It has been a wild few months for me. We ended Season 2 right at the end of December, and I think I talked about there the fact that I was going to take a couple weeks to iron a few new things out for the new season and hopefully get a production assistant hired to help me produce the show in video as well as audio and take some of that burden off. And it just took a lot longer than I thought to find that person. And also, the things that I do day to day got extremely busy for me. So I've talked about a lot on the show that I'm a coach. I do coaching, I do business development consulting, and as well as I provide some security oversight and overwatch for some individuals and some groups. And all of that work got very, very busy for me in the first quarter, which was a real blessing and fantastic. And it definitely took me away from focusing on what was a big change for the podcast. So it took many more weeks than I anticipated, and I can only apologize for that. I have many friends asking me if I was going to continue the show, and the intention was always to continue. And in fact, the great news is I've continued recording episodes. I have not been producing them, but I have been recording and recording new guests or new episodes with new guests, and they have been nothing short of fantastic. It's been an unbelievable run of interviews, and I've got some tremendous guests coming your way in this new season, including I've got a individual that was a pararescue jumper, so PJ with the Air Force. And for those that don't know, that is the Air Force's Special Operations Unit. And arguably, I'm sure the guys in the various Special Operations Units will argue which selection process is more difficult, but certainly the PJ process is an unbelievably arduous process. And this gentleman actually went on to work with the CIA as well and had just a fantastic interview, Nick McKinley. And Nick was just on, as I noticed this week, he was just on Mike Glover's podcast, and I'm a huge fan of Mike Glover. Mike has a massive platform and is doing fantastic things, and it was really humbling to see that Nick was a guest on my show and has now been on, and he's been on many other shows, but was recently on Mike Glover's show, which I believe is called I think it's Mike Glover's podcast or something like that. But in any event, so Nick McKinley, I've got an F-15 fighter pilot that I interviewed, Wes Woodhouse, a tremendous individual, a Christian, and just a real humble guy, tells a great story about being an F-15 fighter pilot. So that one's coming up. I've got a Shark Tank Hall of Famer, so a contestant from the Shark Tank, that her episode, she and her husband's episode, became either the most watched or one of the top 3 or 5 most watched episodes in that show's history. Megan Reamer, and just a fantastic interview with Megan, heart-wrenching, tremendous interview, and a great individual. You're going to love that one. Todd Saylor, who is known as running the donut capital of the world, which is a hilarious story, also an Amazon best-selling author. And a really fun and funny episode that I did with Todd. And also another one, my pastor, so Father Edwin Leonard from St. Anne Catholic Church in Coppell, Texas, who I've admired from afar for a long time. Obviously, he means a lot to me as the pastor of our church, and it was just a thrill to get a chance to sit down with him and interview him, and took an hour of his time on what is a very, very busy schedule of his. So fantastic discussion there, and many, many others. Those are just a handful, but I have continued to interview rigorously and have had some great conversations that now will be back to that Wednesday release schedule and coming back to you. And likely what I'm going to do is a second episode per week to bring some of these great guests to you, and some of which I interviewed several months ago, and I really want to get that content out to you. So more to come on some additional episodes. Likely will be some Friday releases to go along with the Wednesday schedule. So with that, our first episode of Season 3, Episode 89, is with Michael O'Brien. Michael has a great story. He is an athlete, someone near and dear after my heart. He is a triathlete, a cyclist, and he has an unbelievable crash on his bike, and a really grim picture painted by his doctors, and it created this eye-opening and this awakening moment, right, where he recognized that then, what in hindsight, what became his last bad day, what he would call his last bad day, and it started this new beginning of removing the victim mentality and then pivoting forward to become and step into the life that really he was designed to lead from the beginning. So a fantastic story. You're going to love hearing from Michael. So I invite you to sit back, get ready to enjoy episode 89 and this week's guest, Michael O'Brien. Welcome to the Return to Authenticity podcast, where we hear inspiring and courageous stories of people who made bold pivots in their lives toward their more authentic selves, that version of themselves they were born to be or they had to find after life threw them a major curveball. I'm your host, Eric Sardina. Welcome and stand by. Welcome to the show, everyone. Today's guest is Michael O'Brien. In July of 2001, Michael was the marketing lead for a $700 million brand and made more money and had more stuff than he could have dreamed. He had everything, and yet below the surface, he thought he had to do more before he, quote, made it. He was in the continued wash cycle of chasing happiness. On July 11th of 2001, while riding his bicycle, an SUV traveling 40 miles an hour hit him head on. He should have died. On the medevac to the trauma center, he made a promise to God that he would stop chasing happiness if he survived. When Michael came out of surgery, his doctors painted a grim picture of a lifetime of limitations, walking with difficulty and certainly never riding a bike again. He became angry, scared, and vengeful, imagining the worst for the driver of the SUV who nearly killed him. During one of his darkest moments, a mentor shared that all events in our lives are neutral until we label them. He suggested that maybe his accident happened for Michael and not to him. Michael didn't receive this thought well, but gradually it started to sink in. Something started to sink in for Michael that he had to heal his mind in order to heal his body. And the next day, he started his mindfulness practice that today he calls Pause, Breathe, Reflect. And he shares that practice with leaders around the world. He now calls July 11th, 2001 his last bad day, as it marked a new beginning to living life purposefully and achieving success from the inside out. I'm excited to have Michael on the show today to share his story of how he overcame a near-death experience to find beauty, gratitude, and joy in the near tragic, and how he helps others do the same. And with that, Michael O'Brien, welcome to the show.
Eric, thank you. It's great to be with you. And I'm totally stoked. As you know, we talked a little bit before we hit record that we have common Western New York roots. So I always
Absolutely.
love meeting people from Western New York. It's like good people. So
For
I
sure.
can't wait to sit down with you and dive into things.
I know. And I was regretting, we were talking, I was regretting not hitting record because we were chopping up some pretty good bills. We were pontificating on how this season could eventually wrap up in a very positive way for the Bills, despite a very weird and ugly middle of the year. The Bills finding themselves basically at 500 at the middle part of the season. And now with a glimmer of hope that if they can get past a couple teams that they really have to beat if they have a prayer of playing in the playoffs anyway, a couple of below 500 teams like the Chargers and I think the Patriots, got to get by those two and then a head up meeting with the Dolphins on the last game of the year, potentially to take the division. So fingers crossed, always hopeful in our Bills world, right? For
Uh,
maybe we can
Always
back
hopeful.
into a playoff scenario where we get hot, like you were saying, get hot at the right moment, and you never know what happened. My Texas Rangers had that happen this year, right? Terrible second half of the year, backed into the playoffs in a very ugly way, and yet managed to win the whole darn thing. So who knows, right? Bills hope springs eternal.
Absolutely. It's good to be hopeful and optimistic.
For sure. And with that great segue, let's talk about you, Michael. Tell me a bit about your childhood growing up. Where'd you grow up? What was your family life like? And how did life lead you toward this path of corporate success? How did it start?
Well, as we just referenced, it started in Western New York in Rochester. So I grew up there in the suburbs. I would say I had a pretty typical, childhood experience. My both parents worked. I'm a proud Gen Xer.
Yeah,
So
right on.
my mom was a nurse and my dad was in sales, and sports was my big thing. So that was like the big focal point. my parents never went to college, so they didn't really stress academics. So I wasn't really applying myself to my schoolwork.
Mm,
Like where I would dream about like whatever sport was in season. My dream was, oh, I'm going to go pro one day. I'm
yeah.
like Eric. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go pro. And so my baseball team, baseball was a big sport for me. Was the Toronto Blue Jays.
Yep.
Because hey, what kid in America doesn't grow up wishing, dreaming of playing for Canadians baseball team or Canada's baseball team? So that was it. So Canada, Toronto was the biggest city to Rochester, the
Yep.
closest city to Rochester. So that's where I saw my first Major League Baseball game, and that's really where I experienced city life for the very first
Yep.
time. Growing up in Rochester, you're about 5.5, maybe 6 hours away from New York City, which I never went to until I became an adult. So,
Same.
so I had this whole like sports themed childhood. From baseball to golf to bowling. I was a pretty good bowler back in my
Got to be
day. I had my
Western New
own,
York. Got to be a good
yeah, I had
bowler.
my own bowling balls and my shirts with the monogram Mike on it, the whole thing. And that was it. And then I started to realize, okay, well, I'm probably not going to go to pro in anything. But I also found like this love of cycling. So I fell in love with a bicycle when I was really young. When I came off of training wheels for the very first time, I thought Eric was like, this is so cool. I can go places, man.
Right.
I can travel and explore. Although I probably didn't use that word when I was 5,
Right.
but I thought I had independence from mom and dad. I could go anywhere. So I fell in love with the bike. And even as I got my driver's license, I still was in love with the bike, and I could travel. I could go places. And then I found professional cycling. So those dreams of traditional sports
Yep.
going pro turn to, well, if I can't go pro playing baseball, maybe I can go pro playing doing cycling.
Yep.
And I fell in love with like the whole European blue collar nature of cycling back in the day. It's
Mm,
different now. It's all professional and it's
yep.
leveled up in the whole
Sponsored and
thing. But
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but back in the day it was gritty and resilient, and it seemed muddy and grainy, and it was like all these different qualities I just
Yeah.
loved. And I was like, oh yeah, this is my sport. So, I grew up there in Rochester, not the best place to be a cyclist because of the winters back in the day. I eventually left Rochester to go to school in Virginia. So I went somewhere warmer. I was in the mountains, although if you're listening from Colorado, you'd probably say those aren't really mountains,
All right.
but they were mountains to me. And then I ended up going after college to Washington, D.C. I cycled and raced my bike throughout my whole college life, was one of the founding members of the collegiate cycling scene that's now very popular. But back then we were grassroots.
Yep.
And I just did the whole cycling thing, going up and down the East Coast, doing races on the weekend, training my butt off. And then I moved to DC after graduating from college. I had to get a gig because I took out a whole bunch of student loans. Nothing compared to what kids do today, but
Right.
I still had to find a gig, put my professional sports dreams on ice, and got on the hamster wheel and
Yeah.
started doing the hamster wheel stuff. And in DC, that's where I met my wife. So we met through a personal ad before there was like
Dating
Match.com and
apps.
stuff like
Yep.
that. And we got married there, had our first daughter, and then eventually came up to New Jersey, where I am today.
Wow, man, so many questions about the cycling thing because I share not the same level of certainly achievement and passion, but I certainly share a desire, love for cycling, right? Love to follow cycling. I got into cycling with triathlons, so I started doing triathlons in the really in the early 2000s, around the same time of the story that we've been talking about with you around that 2000 mark. Um, Lance Armstrong was a Texas guy was
Yes,
lighting the European circuit up and winning Tours de France and all this. And it was
coming back from cancer, like the
uh,
whole thing.
the
Yeah,
whole thing, just a phenomenal story. We loved watching the tour and the other long tours that would lead up to it. what's the so there's the Tour d'Italia, right, is around in there, and then
The
the
Giro, yeah,
Vuelta, the
The
Giro.
Giro d'Italia, which is
Yeah.
the Tour of Italy, the Italian version of the Tour de France, and
Yes.
then you'd have some like
The
mini stage
Vuelta,
races,
right?
like
Yes, in
the
Spain.
Vuelta, the Spain one. You have the Tour de Suisse, which is a shorter stage race before the Tour de France, and then the Dauphiné Libéré, which is the
Yes.
another shorter stage race in France. Again, sort of pre-season, if you will, for the Tour de France. But yeah, back in that day when you came into it, Lance was destroying people. His whole
Yeah.
team. He was one of those athletes with one name.
Yes. Right.
Be like Mike. It was like
Yeah.
Lance,
Yeah.
Pele,
Yes.
Michael Jordan.
Right.
Like those guys. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. And I was just such a massive fan of Lance Armstrong, huge fan. And I was the guy that was defending him to the end, like, hey, you can't drug test this guy a million times to Sunday, have him pass everyone, and then call him dirty. If you're going to drug test him, you got to honor the fact that the tests are clean and call him clean. He's just a phenom. And I was the guy, and people are like, you're out of your mind, right? This guy's dirty. I'm like, nope, nope, nope. And when it all came out, I was like, man, I was crushed by it, right? And now I still my head to goes to a couple things. One, I don't, Lance Armstrong. I think it'd be hard to argue he's probably I don't know. I don't want to disparage the guy, but I think personality wise, probably not the guy to aspire to be. Athlete wise, I think he was. I still believe he was a phenom. I think he was a dirty cyclist in a dirty sport with a lot of guys that you really did that in order to compete. The problem that I come to, again, not to go off on a massive tangent on Lance Armstrong, is that he did things to his team and he sued people and he disparaged his team who were speaking out against him. Once they started to come out, he was all in on this lie, so that he had to really go, well, if I was telling the truth, what I do if somebody accused me of this, I would sue him. I would take off and go after him and slander him. And that's what he did in order to keep the lie alive. And it was pretty despicable, right? He did some horrible things to Frank Andrew, his wife. Certainly, was it, who was the other cat? Tyler, uh,
Tyler Hamilton.
Tyler Hamilton,
Yeah.
just tore these guys limb from limb in order to keep the lie alive and the lie alive. And it was, so it was pretty bad. But at the same time, I just can't help but root for the guy. I occasionally will listen to his podcast. Lance is certainly about Lance, but I think, that could be true probably for a lot of athletes at that level. But anyway, I was all in on the cycling world, and still, I still enjoy watching the tour in the summer. When it comes around, my wife and I get into it and watch it, and but not at the same level as when he was crushing souls back in the day.
Yeah. He certainly was, and we still watch it. So I'm a huge fan of the tour.
Yeah.
I My wife really caught the cycling bug when we went to the tour in person for
Oh
the
wow.
first time in 1997. And so she, up until that moment, she was like, "Oh yeah, like my husband's into cycling and he watches the Tour de France on TV during July, but wasn't really a fan." And then we went in person, and we went to Alpe d'Huez, and we went
Oh
to the Champs Elysees for the finish. And keeping in mind, she was 5 months pregnant with our youngest at the time, and she stood on the Champs for 5 hours,
wow.
5 months pregnant, right by the barriers, and didn't leave from 11 a.m. to 6:37 p.m. when the cyclists would come through for the finale.
Yeah.
So she, like, total props to her, but she
Mhm.
really caught the fever seeing the event in person. She was like, "Oh, now I totally get it." And you know, with my story, and we'll get into it, so many people gave me Lance's book while I was in the hospital. It's
Mm.
not about the bike, and I use a lot of his story as motivation to get better and to recover. And I made a commitment that if I got back on the bike, which was really in question, as you mentioned in the intro, that I would give back to his charity foundation, his cancer foundation. And so in 2003, I did the Ride for the Roses in Austin
Oh
and raised
nice.
a whole bunch of money for his charity, which I have no regrets about, because I think, he's like a lot of humans where there's some pain, some maybe trans generational pain that's carried forward, and it comes out in a lot of different ways for a lot of us.
Sure.
It's complicated. We are complicated creatures,
Yes.
and so you see a lot of that, and there's insecurity, and there's a whole bunch, and I like to think that he won those tours. That's my belief, because the whole peloton was doping.
Correct.
And it's what the shame of it is, yeah, because I know Tyler fairly well, Tyler Hamilton, and it was a shame how he treated people to keep the lie alive. But he still was. I remember reading about him when he was 15 as a triathlete.
Yes.
Uh, Obviously, a physical is the physical mental side of athletics for him was quite special, and I'm glad I got to see him compete in the way
Yeah.
that I did.
Agreed. And the fact that the jerseys that were taken from him were given to no one because everybody in the peloton had failed tests during the same time. So they literally have six, I think it's 6 or 7 yellow jerseys. Um, they went to nobody. So it's not like they handed it to the second place guy because the second
Yeah,
place guy also had tested positive.
everyone
Everyone
was
was
doping.
positive.
It was
Yeah.
that time period back then, and if you got if you really went after all sports with like a fine tooth comb, we talked about football earlier or other sports. There's probably a lot of doping in so many different
Right.
sports. I'd like to think that it's cleaner now to a degree,
Right.
but when you have a lot of status and money on the line in a whole bunch of different industries, sports being one of them, you are going to have people who are going to cut corners, and they will look for an edge. That doesn't excuse the
Right.
behavior. It's just like, I think it's just part of our humanness that we when there's something going on inside of us, we think that status, money, fame, and power will make it feel better inside, and it generally doesn't. So,
Beautifully
but
said.
yeah, probably for a whole other like podcast, Eric, we can go down this stream. It's a fascinating conversation. I know, and there's some right answers, but there's also a lot of answers that sit in the gray space. And I think there needs to be some discernment and nuance as we talk about it.
Agreed, and beautifully said, and I think a great segue back to your story. Um, you mentioned where we sort of left off. You're now sort of on that corporate wheel. You've got family, you've got children, some responsibilities, and you start to elevate in the corporate realm. Talk about that and kind of what that was like for you and what your mindset was during those times.
Yeah. So I came out of college thinking, okay, well, here's the script. You got to college. My parents never really planned for college for us. So I was like, all right, first one in the family to go to college, like above and beyond.
Nice.
I'm making it. And now, back then too, it's like the early 90s. So, to bring people back to that era, leadership and success was defined coming out of the,
Mm.
greed is good of the 80s
Gordon
into the
Gekko.
90s.
Yep.
And the leadership icons were people like Jack Welch, and like these dominant,
Yep.
masculine leaders, tough, and like that's the way you led, right? And it was, almost has a military a military style to it, and even though the military has more collaboration than we give it credit for,
Yep.
but it was that dominant way of like, okay, this is success, and this is how you lead, and that's what I thought was the model. So it's like, all right, hustle and grind. Tony Robbins was
Yep.
coming up into the world. I would listen to the tapes and be like, okay, this is what we're going to do, and I did that fairly well. Like I met my girl, we got married, we had one daughter, then we had a second daughter, and then I was doing so well, they were going to bring me up into the home office
Yep.
from being a sales rep in DC, moved to New Jersey, taking on now a role of greater responsibility. We got to the point where we could make a decision as a family that my wife would quit her job, she would stay home to help raise our girls. So I was like, all right, we're doing this on one income. Okay. Like I'm checking the boxes of what it means to be successful.
Yep.
but it was stressful, Eric. It was wicked stressful, as they say up in Boston. And I never learned growing up how to manage my stress. When I was a teenager, I'd break out in pimples and
Yeah.
stuff like that, like stress markers. But I would just pack the stress inside, and I would come home from a really active, busy day, and I would not want to talk about work with my wife, because why would you want to rehash something that's already stressful? So I just pack it down and keep
Yep.
on denying it, or trying to numb it with maybe an extra beer that night and stuff like that. And I was doing this, and then I was working my way up. I got promoted. I was making more money than I ever thought I would make coming out of college. And my career was it was flying. It was it was a really good career. And if LinkedIn was a thing back then, people would be like, okay, you got a pretty good track record. You're going places. And then we had our big offsite meeting in New Mexico in 2001. And after having our second child, she was about 7 months old at the time. I was like, all right, time to get back into health. Like, my
Mm.
health fell apart because I was working so much. We were young parents. I wasn't doing my fitness and my
Yep.
running and my cycling the way I used to. So, you gained a few lbs, you
Mm.
got out of shape, you're breathing a little bit heavier. And I was like, all right, time to get back into health. Let's get back into cycling and back into racing. So I brought my bike out to the meeting while other guys brought their golf clubs.
Yep.
I brought the bike. I was going to get some miles in, get a good week of training in New Mexico, cross New Mexico off a state I've ridden my bike in, and it'd be a pretty good story.
Yeah.
At least that's what I thought going in. I still think it's a pretty kick-ass story now. It just I wasn't anticipating some of the curveballs I was about to receive. So
Right. Right. How cool it was going to be. Right. Yeah. So
how cool it was going to be, yeah.
were you in the mountains in New Mexico or in the desert, high desert?
I was in between Albuquerque and Santa Fe, so they
Okay.
had built a major hotel chain, which I won't mention here, built a new property in between Albuquerque and Santa Fe. It started off as, a resort ish, like a spa, golf course. Today, it has like a casino nearby and a whole bunch, but that was the start. And it was really a brand new property for them. And we were one of the first companies to hold a meeting out there. So, I was a little suspicious right from the rip, Eric, because I was like, it's New Mexico, it's July, it's going to be really hot. Like, why are we going way out there? Because it wasn't easy to get to,
Mm.
from
Yeah.
New Jersey, where my company was based and where I live. Getting to Albuquerque is not a direct flight.
Right.
You're hopping planes, and you land in Albuquerque, and you still got a long drive to get to the hotel. And I'm like, why are we going here of all the places? And well, that was the place that we were meant to go, I guess. And so I got there, and I, had a couple rides before the big day, and it was they were good rides, but actually the riding out there wasn't as great as I thought it would be. I thought I was going to be in the hills
Mm.
and a little bit of the desert and like open space, but the infrastructure, i.e., the roads, were not terrific to ride on. But I did find a loop on the hotel property that was about 2 miles in length. And I was like, okay, I'll just do that 2 mile loop multiple times, and I'll still get some exercise in.
Yeah.
And that'll be good enough, Michael. That's what I thought.
Yep, yep. So, in being that I live in Texas, we have vacationed in New Mexico for since I was a kid, right? So since the mid '80s, and when I got into cycling, I similarly thought, okay, I'm gonna take my bike up to. We would go to Red River in the summer, which is at 8,500 feet elevation, ski town, beautiful. I'm gonna take my bike up there and ride. And I did that for, I think I did 3 or 4 years of that. Dragged the bike up there, hanging off the back of the car, and then rode in the mountains, and some very, very, very pretty mountain rides up there. Very challenging for a sea dweller at 500 feet here in Dallas to go to 8,500 feet and ride. But it was great. At the same time, having made that drive up there, 90% of the drive to that resort. or that ski town, is pretty darn ugly. And the road is that chip seal, really hard on the tires, very high drag rate. So you can't really get going. It feels like you're constantly pedaling uphill, and a lot of that high desert flat and a lot of truck traffic, and just not what I would call pretty rides. You can find great rides in New Mexico, but there's lots, especially Albuquerque area is very like ugly, flat, not friendly, you know, type of ride. So I don't know where you were in that, if you were up in the mountains or if you were sort of in between or what, but
Yeah,
I can
in
picture it.
between. I could see the mountains,
Yeah.
but I was in between. And but to your point, like the road surface wasn't great. I had brought out my buddy's bike Friday, so it was a travel bike. So even that, it's not this type of setup you would
Yeah.
have for your regular road bike or current day gravel bike.
Yeah.
It was, a travel bike and, smaller wheels. It's just the feel is a little funky,
Yeah.
still functions as a nice bike. But I thought about buying this bike Friday from him because I was traveling for work a lot. United actually back in the day was Continental, but I was a frequent flyer on Continental. I was traveling all over the place domestically, and then my company globally was based in Tokyo, so I'd go there a lot. So I thought, okay, let's get a travel bike, and this
Yeah.
way I can get my fitness on as I travel and avoid the hotel gym and explore the cities that
Yeah.
I'm visiting. Going back to how I felt about the bike when I was a young child, I was like, hey, I can go places. This is going
Right.
to be really cool. And so I only got about 3 rides in on that bike Friday until the bike Friday blew up, thanks to the SUV.
So talk about that. So talk about July 11th. What happened? What were the circumstances in which you got in that wreck?
Yeah, it was one of those sliding door moments. I'm not sure if you've ever seen that movie with Gwyneth Paltrow, but it's it, it takes her like two different tracks of life, and it's more like 10 seconds either way, her life would be different. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit of that type of story. So the night before, we had a typical offsite type of agenda. We went out for Mexican food and had a couple margaritas, and my buddies at work stayed at the bar. I went back to my hotel room because I had an early morning day. I was going to wake up. Woke up about 5:30, got my kit on, and headed out through the lobby of the hotel and did this 2-mile loop. And sun was coming up. It's July, so you got a lot of daylight at that time of year. And I did a few laps, but on the fourth lap, I came around a bend and an SUV was coming right at me. The police estimate that it was going about 40 miles an hour based on the skid marks.
Hmm.
And when I first saw it, I was like, it was one of those things like this does not compute. Like what is happening? Like what is he doing? Like why is he coming right at me? This is crazy. Like he sees me, right? Like he's gonna swerve to miss me, and he kept coming, and I was pedaling, and then everything starts to slow down, as you can imagine when
Hmm.
you've been for anyone who's been in an accident, everything slows down, and I'm like, holy cow. And I tried to swerve at the last moment to like ditch the bike and ditch myself into the shoulder, but things were moving too quickly, but also in slow motion.
Yeah.
I couldn't get out of the way fast enough. And I still to this day, Eric, remember the sound I made when I hit his grill. So the left grill, as you're looking at the driver's view. And then that flipped me up in the air and twisted me all around. And I went right through his windshield. I blew a hole in it. That's how hard I hit it. And then I still remember the screech of his brakes. And then when he stopped, it made a thud when I came to the asphalt below because the
Hmm.
impact or the force of him stopping threw me off his hood. And even when he stopped, he was still 85% in my lane. So he,
Yeah.
we still don't really know why he was in my lane. He claimed it was because a coyote was out there. But I will say this as an East Coast suburban kid,
Hmm.
if there was a coyote, I would have done a U-turn and went back to my hotel room. I'm like, I like
Yeah.
like the whole idea of like a coyote is
Yeah.
back then would be scary.
Right.
So I'd be like, like, and I've been chased by too many
Dogs.
creatures, namely dogs. I'm like, I'm not sure if I want to dance with a coyote. So I don't really fully believe that story. I don't think there was anything there. He was going fast, too fast for the road to get to work. He was going up the service road to the hotel. He was a hotel employee. And when I regained consciousness, I was surrounded by EMT, police, fire, ambulance, you name it. The state trooper came in because the state trooper is the only one that can pronounce a accident victim dead on
Mm.
this at the scene of an accident, and they didn't think I was going to make it. They called the helicopter the medevac because we were too far away from the only trauma one center in the state, which was in Albuquerque. And I remember trying to convince them, like, do we really need to take the helicopter? Because I was not, even though I was flying a lot for work, I wasn't a real chill flyer. I was like a
Mm.
little nervous and I had never been in a helicopter. So I was like, oh my God, like, I don't, here I'm fighting for my life
Right.
and I'm trying to convince them that we'll just take the ambulance. And they're like, we got to get you to the hospital right away. And I cracked a joke. I asked the EMT, it's like, oh, how's my bike? It was my weak attempt to cut the tension with a little humor because that was my way back in the day. I wouldn't sit with the tension or stress. I would just try to joke it away or push it down. And I just remember like, man, it's not supposed to go this way. Like I am following the script. Like I'm doing the things right. Like work hard, work your way up, have a couple kids, get married, buy stuff, like, you know, have your external merit badges. Like I'm following the script perfectly.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to end this way. Like, come on. Like what the heck?
Yeah.
And they put me on the helicopter and I I made a bargain with whomever was listening. I was like, listen, if I live, I promise I'll stop chasing happiness. And I remember every minute of the 19 minutes they flew me to Albuquerque. My focal point was my flight nurse, and they brought me from the roof of the hospital down into the trauma center, met my team. They put me under anesthesia. And then I don't remember anything for the next like 4 days and change.
Mm.
Uh, First surgery took about 12 hours. I needed 36 units of blood product to uh, stabilize my life. They sent me to the ICU. Eventually, my wife came out that day with our youngest, and the vascular surgeon said, hey, um, your husband's been in a very bad accident. We did the best we could, and the next 72 hours are going to be critical. And she's like, oh my God, like, this is not the script. Like, this is not how it's supposed to be. And, then it got real for her. Again, I'm in the ICU, so I don't remember any of this. And I eventually learned that they had told my wife they weren't sure how I lived. They said, had I been 10 years older, I was 33 at the time, or not in shape, I would have died before I got to the hospital because I had lost so much blood because the femoral artery was lacerated when my femur shattered.
Oh.
And she's like, holy cow. And so they predicted, like, once I came out of the ICU, they were like, okay, here's the deal. Your driver had a revoked license. He had 5 DUIs on his New Mexico driver's license. You technically got hit on like outside of New Mexico because you got hit on like basically tribal land.
Reservation.
So it wasn't, yeah, it wasn't New Mexican land. So this is a different jurisdiction. Um, yeah, he wasn't supposed to be driving. His license was revoked. You're probably not going to walk well ever again based on the extent of your injuries, and you're probably never going to ride again. And so here I am. A lot of my identity was, well, I'm a professional now. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm an athlete still. And my whole world got tipped upside down, and it felt like it was shaken violently. And I'm like, well, what kind of husband am I going to be? Like, what kind of dad am I going to be? Like, am I going to be dependent upon my like wife? Like, am I going to be a burden? And they basically said like athletics, like, you know, see ya, I wouldn't want to be ya. Like that's over.
Yeah.
And I also wondered like, what kind of career am I going to have? Am I going to be so banged up? Am I ever going to get back to work? And so I got really pissy. I got really angry. I was like, this is so unfair. This, like, I was doing everything right. Like, how dare you, whomever, you know, who's listening? Like, and I really wanted to get back at the driver. I was like, because I grew up, an eye for an eye,
Yeah.
tooth for a tooth. And I'm like, you harm me, I'm going to harm you, but I'm going to harm you more.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to hit me, I'm going to hit you back harder. And that's how I was raised. And that's sort of all I knew. And so when people would call or visit in the hospital, I did try to put on the happy face. Like, I'm still from Western New York. I'm still a Bills fan. So I'm still hopeful and optimistic. I'm
Always.
thinking, I'm like, okay, no, this is going to be good. This is our year. Like this, I'm going to make it. But deep down inside, I didn't believe any of that. I was like, I'm hosed.
Yeah.
This sucks. My my life is over, and this is so unfair. And yeah, I was pissed off. Inside, I was pissed off. Again, on the outside, I was like, nah, the Bills have a chance this year, you
Right.
know. But I did not believe it at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. Were you so you saw talking about your femur was shattered and your femoral artery was lacerated. That's typically, I mean, so knowing a little bit about the body, I mean, if you tear an artery, you're generally 40 seconds from blacking out, you're a minute and a half from death. You must have gotten pressure or something on that artery to prevent you from just bleeding out on the road.
Yeah, they put a tourniquet on my leg, um, and so when it got severed, I want to make sure I paint a clear picture. It wasn't like it was cut cleanly.
Right.
It was cut, but still intact. Like you
Yeah.
think about a hose where it's like cut, but it's still connected.
Yep.
But when you look at pictures after it was cleaned up, there is a whole big patch on the road that's stained with my blood.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
quite clear. So there was a tremendous amount of blood loss. And I do remember like struggling with staying conscious. Once I
Mhm.
regained consciousness, my whole mantra was like, stay awake, Michael.
Yeah.
Do not fall asleep. Because I was really worried if I had fallen asleep again or if I lost consciousness, I would never regain it. And I also thought, like, if I stayed awake, I could control the situation,
Right.
which is really funny in
Yeah.
hindsight. But at
Yes.
the time, I'm like, okay, what's going on? Like, what's happening? And I was in the worst pain of my life, Eric. I had like no control over the situation at all. But I was like, I gotta stay awake because
Yeah.
like I gotta find out what's happening. Again, going back to my idea of what a leadership is, a leader is all controlling. So
Yeah.
like, let me stay awake. Let me make sure they're doing things right. And, now that you talk about it, it's like you look back, it's like, well, that was ridiculous. But in the moment, that was my thinking.
Yeah. I think some of the things you shared there, Michael's the powerful parts that come out for me are what you said about feeling like you had done it right and it wasn't fair, right? So, and I think I
Yeah.
get caught up in this, and I know others that I know, it's very easy, I think, to get caught up in, man, I didn't deserve this. Like I've done everything to follow the right path, and yet this thing has happened that I didn't want, didn't expect, and it seems like this massive roadblock or inconvenience or worse that I just didn't deserve, and it's not fair. These things are supposed to happen to others that aren't doing it right, that aren't following the rules or doing all the things, and yet it's happened to me. And it's so easy to get stuck right there in that victim mentality, that victim mindset of, why did this happen to me? I'm pissed that it happened. I can't seem to figure out why it happened, and so I just get angrier, and I just figure it's done, like it's over, like I can't see a path forward. It's so easy
Mhm.
to get stuck right there. Pardon the interruption, everyone. Do you ever feel like you're out of alignment with your true gifts, your passion, and your purpose for being on this earth? Do you feel like you're grinding it out each week with the appearance of success and still asking, is this it? If so, I get it. I've been right where you're at. And once I figured it out for myself, it's why I started coaching. Now I help my clients get back into alignment with their authentic self. I help them find meaning, purpose, joy, and energy in each day. Check out my website at ericsardina.com to learn more and to schedule a free 15-minute strategy session. And now, back to the show.
Oh, absolutely. And that was my thinking, Eric, really growing up in my early professional life. Well, if something unfortunate happened to someone else, they weren't working hard enough, or if you got sick, my feeling was well, other people get sick. I'm going to give you my thoughts and prayers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be there for you,
Right.
but getting sick is something that happens to other people. Or if you're not having success in your job, well, it's you got to hustle more, brother. So you're not following the script. You're not doing it right.
Yeah.
And obviously we can go down a lot of different paths. As more sort I'm a white male. The script is relatively easy for me compared to a whole host of other people. But my upbringing was pretty isolated. It was, I came from a high school of 400 kids, and 396 were white. It's, that was sort of my world, and that's my worldview. And I thought, yeah, this is so unjust. And
Mm.
and this is not supposed to happen to me. This happens to other people. And
Right.
then I can help them feel good, which
Yeah.
makes me feel good when I can do that.
Yeah.
But that was what I thought the rhythm of life was. And then it happens to you, the unexpected comes, then you're faced with, all right, buddy, what do you
Yeah.
do now?
Yeah.
And that's a choice.
Right. For sure. All right. So let's talk about you had that mentor that kind of started to speak to you about maybe this happened for you, not to you. You were chasing happiness. You were a bit unhappy. You're stressing your life, you're packing it down into your backpack kind of thing. Talk a bit
Yeah.
about that, start that shift in mindset.
Yeah, it was people throughout the whole journey have offered advice, some of it solicited, some of it unsolicited. And there was a moment where I was particularly vulnerable or weak, and I just dumped. And the conversation was, hey, listen, and it might have been too soon to have this conversation, but the conversation happens when it's supposed to happen. That maybe this didn't happen to you, it happened for you. And the whole concept that, hey, everything is neutral until you label it. And I was like, what? Like, keep in mind, I'm in a hospital bed, I'm not moving, I'm in a wheelchair. And I'm like, is this some crazy? It's is it Zig Ziglar gone nuts? Because I grew up with Zig Ziglar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this a Zig Ziglar, Jim Rome, Tony Robbins?
Right. Woo
What is
woo. Yeah.
this?
Create
Yeah,
your own world. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. They don't understand what I'm going through. And it's well, everything is neutral until you label it, and it does sort of tie back into Viktor Frankl's work with the
Mm.
man's search for meaning, Holocaust survivor,
Yeah.
where between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is your opportunity to grow and your freedom. And he's like, it's neutral. So everything's neutral. We just get really quick with labeling things as good, bad, right, wrong. We are so quick with that as adults. We lose our curiosity, and we get addicted to being right.
Mm.
And he was like, okay, just create some space. Maybe there's a different way for you to look at this. And then eventually I looked back and I said, you know what? All right. Yeah. You know what? That's true. Everything is neutral. Things happen. and we can create some space. It's neutral until we label it. We can slow that process down because once you label something, now you've defined it, now you've framed it, and you lose possibilities when you do that. So, how do you create a little bit more openness? How do you slow the whole game down? And that's something that I learned through athletics. Like when the game was going too fast, it's easy to make a mistake. So slow the game down. And I decided to label the day of July 11th my last bad day, not because it's all like, you know, positivity and unicorns and rainbows. It was more about if I can go to bed each night and when my head hits a pillow, I have people in my life, my wife, my girls, my friends, family, who love me, and I love people back. And knowing that our days are really just a collection of moments, how can I call the full day a bad one? How can I give that day that full label? Because now you've just defined the full day
Yeah.
as bad. And I was like, well, that's impossible because I still have people in my life that I love. They love me back. So how can I call that whole day bad? Was it challenging? Yeah. And so what I decided to start doing as far as a mindset and attitude of life is like, I'm going to have a whole bunch of different moments throughout the day. Some are going to be bad and some are going to be like, will produce anger and frustrating and sad and irritating. And some will be joyous and sometimes and happy. And sometimes you have anger one moment and then all of a sudden you're joyful, right? You get, like it's
Yeah.
go boom, boom. And so I decided, okay, my days are filled with moments. And at the end of the day, I can practice gratitude, which I knew nothing about until my recovery. And then I can just say, well, that was a day. It was complex, it was complicated, but it ain't bad
Yeah.
because I still have love in my life. And if I have love in my life, then that's the fuel that helps create a better tomorrow. And that was the start of me thinking differently about how I wanted to live.
Right on. Love that. And so did the pause, breathe, and reflect start? Was that sort of the beginning of that? Or talk a bit about, I want to get into like pause, breathe, reflect. And then I know also you have the grace framework, right? Gratitude, reframing,
Yeah,
awareness,
yeah,
community, energy. Let's talk a bit about those things.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking, by the way. So going back to again athletics, my recovery, there was so much to it. It was overwhelming. And so many different people gave me like a lot of advice. Some of it great, and
Yeah.
some of it maybe less than great. But it all came, all the advice I got came from a good place in their heart. They wanted to help, but one had a point of view about what I should be doing.
Mm.
And my doctors had a point of view, and there was prognosis. And, like some doctors were really optimistic, and some people were like, really, well, I'm just being a realist, Michael. And it's like, it was a lot. And the game felt way too fast. So going back to athletics, it was like, okay, when the game is going too fast, what do? You take a breath, you slow it down. It's also advice that the EMTs gave me on on the day of the accident on site. They're like, just try to breathe. When we got people, just try to breathe.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try, I'm going to slow things down. I'm going to like take a deep breath in and a deep breath out before hitting a free throw
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
you know, taking a shot or what have you, or doing a pitch. And so then that next morning, after I had this big aha, I wheeled myself to a quiet place in the hospital and I did a box breathing pattern, which is a simple breathe in for a count of four, hold for four, breathe out for four, hold for four. And I did that for 4 or 5 minutes. And I was like, okay. And that was the beginning of like, okay, I'm going to start my mornings off differently. I'm going to slow things down so I can be thoughtful. And I started calling these my pause because I was pausing and connecting with my breath. And then the reflect piece was important. So my way of meditation involves a lot of reflection because it's like, all right, so you did that. You slowed the game down. Now, how do you want to show up? How do you want to approach your rehab? How do you want to greet the people who visit you? What are you grateful for? And so that reflect piece gives us space to be thoughtful, set our intentions, if you will, or understand where we want to place our attention during the day. So we can take any practice that we might have and like weave it into the day. So that became like my little pause, breathe, reflect breaks that I would call PBR for short. And I thought I was being clever because everyone in America, when they hear PBR, they think of a particular beverage. And I was like, I need to grab a PBR. And everyone's like, oh, that's funny. And
Right.
I'm like, I know a different type of PBR. I'm like,
Right.
I need a chance to I need a moment to breathe.
Yeah.
And like, who out there doesn't need current day a moment to breathe? Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And so from that became my mindfulness and meditation practice. I knew nothing about it, but I just started doing it and I studied further and became a teacher and all that jazz. And then grace was a complement to it. So I love the word grace.
Same.
Just I think of ballet dancers. Obviously, I think about my childhood, going to church with grace, but just that whole concept of like walking through life or traveling through life with more grace. There's something just so peaceful about it. It's not reactionary. We're not on a hamster wheel. It's just like fluidity. I'm like,
Elegant.
okay,
Yep.
it's out. Yeah, great word, Eric. And so grace to me represents some of the building blocks that I use to get through my recovery. So G is for gratitude. So I developed a gratitude practice to really help me understand. All right, Michael, you've lost a whole bunch, but what do you have? What can you still do?
Yeah.
And can even be grateful for the muddy moments, the challenging ones, because they'll probably lead to a lot of growth for you. The R is about reflection or reframing. Like, is there another way to see this?
Mm.
To that question my mentor gave me, did this happen to you or for you? So, how to shift your perspective. The A is all about awareness. What do you see out there? It can also be about action because I am a person of action still. So,
Mm.
even though I'm a meditation teacher and executive coach, it's not all about chilling out. It's about finding a space so you can get your head on straight, so you can take purposeful action. Because I'm still about taking action. C is about community. The word I would use is who's in your peloton, a group of cyclists in a bike race. But P doesn't work for grace, so C becomes community.
Right.
And then the E is all about energy, because at the end of the day, we're all just these sacks of flesh and bones and meat
Mm.
and energy, and we have a vibe. We create a ripple effect when we show up in the world. And for me, it's like, okay, what kind of energy do I want to bring into my day
Yeah.
that's going to create a positive ripple effect? And that's grace. And for me, it's a great way to frame out a way to live where you you don't deny the hard stuff, but you can definitely appreciate the good stuff, and you bring an elegance, a fluidity to your life that you got this. You can go with the flow, but you're not leaning back all the way. You're finding that sweet spot between like being like super like triggered
Mm.
and totally chillaxed and lazy. Like there's a middle ground there that's like a sweet spot. In the meditation world, a lot of folks would refer to it as like equanimity. So it's like perfect balance, almost like a surfer on the wave, like
Mm.
always like doing micro adjustments to her balance to ride that wave, because the waves are always going to come, but we can learn how to surf.
I love that analogy. And what's powerful to me in what you just described there is we all go through these moments, right? Everything from emailing, customer service about some challenge you're having with an airline ticket or whatever it might be, right? Some goofy thing that we're stuck on, some hold music for an hour trying to get a resolution. You can get so wound up in anger. And how do you just step back for a second and have that moment of gratitude for the home you're in, or the office that you're able to be in, or the community that you live in, or the fact that you have clean water coming out of a sink on demand, and all these little things we just sort of go, yeah, but that's a given, that's a given, that's a given. Well, not for about 7.5 billion people on the planet. The luxuries and the things that we have in our lives are not a given. We sort of have checked them off as they are. But it's this idea of, it's not an idea of control. It's not an idea of I'm going to take control. It's almost an idea of giving up control and recognizing, man, all this stuff is coming in and out of my life, but I can choose to not be a victim. I can choose to not get angry and triggered, and I can choose to respond to it and find that grace in the things that are all around it. It's not, like you said, it's not just one thing. It's not, your day isn't one thing. It's this tapestry of many, many things all woven together. And I can choose to see all the negative things and get angry about them, or I can choose to see the beautiful things that are in the middle of all of it and be okay with it, right? And be glad to be here and be glad that I've got great friends and family and people that love me and that I love, and frame my own day. I just love that perspective you've got. Now, one thing I wanted to ask about, because I know I think this is part of your teaching as well, is, and from my perspective, when I talk about some of these things, the reaction is, well, I don't have time. I don't have time for that, man. Whoa, that sounds like a lot of time, like journaling and prayer or meditation. Like, I don't have time for that. And this idea that you can take 2 minutes and interject some of these practices and greatly impact the next hour of your day and maybe your whole day. So talk about how you maybe have broken down some of these concepts into very bite-sized pieces.
Yeah. So what I started to discover as I dove into studying mindfulness and meditation way back, now that my accident is like well over 20 years ago, is that there was really not a lot of literature about, well, how long do you do this for? Do you do it every day? Should it be an hour or like half an hour? And there wasn't really a lot of science, although there is a lot of science on the benefits of meditation. And I will also say it's not for everyone, but it's certainly for more people than currently meditate. So, and what I realized coming from the world that I came from, because after my accident, I went back to my corporate life, but with a different script, with a different attitude, grace model, my pause, breathe, reflect. And I really do credit it for helping me get to the executive suite. But as I talk to people when I left corporate into my executive coaching life, people are like, I don't have time to do something like that in the morning. So, in our morning rituals, current day, have gotten a little out of control. Like, it used to be like, okay, let's just, have maybe some morning prayer or morning exercise. And now everyone's like, you got to do 50 things before 9 a.m. It reminds me of the old Army recruitment
Yeah.
commercial. We do more by 9 a.m. than most people do all day. And that's become our morning routine. And I think it's become very transactional,
Yeah.
where people go through all these different things. They're rushing through one thing to get to the next thing so they can complete their morning routine, but they don't bring it throughout the day. It's not transformational as far as like how they're living life. And so a lot of people said, yeah, meditation, get it, makes sense. I probably should do it, but I don't have time. And my feeling is, okay, cool. If you don't have 10 minutes in the morning, I bet you have 5 times throughout the day where you have 2 minutes. So let's start there. I'm a big believer in starting with like a small step. That's how I got
Mm.
back on my bike, back racing and doing the things that I do. Small steps consistently with frequency over time. That's how we develop healthy habits. And so I'm like, cool. If you don't have 10 minutes in the morning, I got you. Like, I get it. Like, who does? Like, if you have kids, getting them off to school, or now we're commuting back to work, it's hard to find that time. We don't even have time to have like a really decent meal in the morning. So we grab a bagel or a muffin and
Yeah.
coffee, and that's breakfast. So totally get it. So my feeling is like, give me 2 minutes 5 times a day. And we're going to start there. And then let's see how you feel. And because meditation, again, isn't all about relaxing. It's about finding that sweet spot so you can have greater awareness in your life. You can have sharper focus when you need sharper focus, and you can handle the unexpected when it comes with a little bit more grace. And so we're going to start there. So that's a big part of my philosophy. The cool thing now is that there's more research coming out that does suggest that shorter practices have a really great benefit, and as big of a benefit as some longer practices do, which is great because I think it meets people where they're at today because we are quite active and busy.
Mm.
I'm not going to little me isn't going to change the world on that, but if I can help people create a little bit more space so they can be a little bit more thoughtful about how they're showing up for the people they love in their lives and their work and their personal lives, and they can gain more enjoyment out of it, maybe let go of some of that stress and take out a few rocks in their backpack, and it helps them build a lifelong practice that can be longer over time. Then what a great place to start. And that's where I start with the people that I teach meditation to.
Right on. Love it. All right. So as we start to look to wrap up, so you mentioned you went back to the corporate world, right? So you got yourself well again. You took some of these practices, you went back into the corporate world, and you attribute some of that changed mindset and mindfulness to helping you elevate to the executive suite. So you achieve some very high echelon, roles within companies. And then you stepped out into a coaching world now, or kind of talk about where you're at current day, what you're working on.
Yeah. So I went back to my corporate life because I did, I liked what we were doing. I didn't necessarily like how I was doing it.
Yeah.
So I changed the how piece of it. And again, got to the executive suite, had a team of nearly 1,000 people. I had a P&L that I was responsible for that was close to $4 billion. So I'm doing, again, fairly well. I'm working a different script though. I'm changing things up, managing my stress better, managing the moments better. But I wasn't really telling anyone I was meditating because, again, this is early 2000s. Meditation still is a little like in corporate, it's
Yeah.
still a little woo woo. It's like flower child,
Yeah.
grape nuts and granola,
Rocks.
like,
Yep.
yeah,
And
yeah,
yoga
like
mats and
moonbeams and
right.
astrology and
Right.
all of it. It was considered soft. And I was the chief revenue person. So, like,
What industry was
you know,
this? What industry?
healthcare,
Okay.
healthcare. And so here it's healthcare, and you think, well, healthcare, like you would want to have like mindfulness and meditation be part of it, but not so much for another conversation. But it was considered just too soft. I felt like if I brought this forward, people would think I was weirder than maybe already am. Who knows, right? And I was like, I am not going to mention this. Then what I knew though in my recovery that eventually I would get into helping others, executive coaching, helping people lead differently, because I do think even more so now today in 2024 is that we need to lead people better. We're not leading people well.
Mm.
And corporate life is ripe for change after going through the pandemic and a whole bunch.
Mm.
So now I help leaders do just that, to be a more conscious leader, a leader that's more curious, more compassionate and empathetic, but still quite driven to get stuff done because that's still a part of who I am. But we're going to change how we do that. And so that's still the work I do today. I talk about culture as to really around who's in your peloton, who are you riding with in life, and who's riding with you.
Love it.
And then I combine my brass tacks of being in the executive suite with my story about change and resilience and my practice of meditation. So we have like this really good mixture of like brass tacks, hard skills of corporate leadership, but helping people lead in a different way, changing the how so it can be more enjoyable for them and enjoyable for the people around them.
Yeah. Fantastic. Have you written your story?
I wrote a memoir back in 2017 called Shift. And then I wrote a little small book called My Last Bad Day Shift. And I'm working on updating that after going through the pandemic of different things and bringing more of my grace model into it. But, I feel like we live in like really interesting times. And I do think, much like my mentor shared with me way back in the day for me, that maybe some of COVID, some of the pandemic happened for us, not to
Mm,
us, as a way to say, hey, this is what happens when you slow it down just a beat or two. I'm not
mm.
telling anyone to stop, right? I'm not saying that. That's not part of my message. I'm just saying, hey, every now and again, pause, come back to your breath, breathe deeply. And in that reflect mode, be thoughtful about how you want to show up. Because when the stress gets too much for us in life, what usually happens is that we snap,
Mm.
we lose it in front of or with the people we love the most. Like we keep it all in check at work for the most part. Like we bottle it up and we're like, but when we get home, and the dog does something or the kid says something or the partner says something, that's when we snap. And then as soon as we say what we want to like pull back, we have a whole bunch of regrets, a little guilt, some shame, and then it creates a spiral that's really unhealthy. So doing our pause, breathe, reflect way of meditation helps us at work to manage the stress so it doesn't build up so much, and you can be a little bit more thoughtful when you come into your personal life. So you can be there in the way that you want to for the people that you really truly love. And also yourself. Like we can't forget about putting our own oxygen mask on first, as they
Mm.
say, and in every flight that we take. And a little care for ourselves can go a long way in putting a better ripple out into the world.
Right on. I love it. Man, you definitely have a great book to write in there. Take those smaller books and write there's a great book there. And then I would think, I don't know if you're doing a lot of keynote speaking or speaking of big audiences, but your message is so powerful and so needed. I would think
Oh,
you'd
well,
have a lot
thanks,
of
Eric.
takers for that.
Yeah, thank you. I sort of hit a little bit of a pause on some of the speaking I would do just through the pandemic. I was
Yep.
doing some stuff as many people were doing via Zoom, but when we finished up 2022, I had a little bit of a moment where I was like, I was spent.
Yeah.
I was, and I went to my wife. I'm like, yeah, I am, I'm tired.
Yeah.
Because it was all the pandemic and creating space for my clients. Also, I rode my bike across the country in 2022 and we launched our app. So it was like I was I was just trying to like dial back on some things just to create some space.
Yeah.
As I head into the new year 2024 here, there's definitely a desire to have connection in person with people. I think Zoom and Microsoft Teams has been fantastic, but I really do miss being in community with people. So
Yeah.
I hit pause on some of the virtual talks, but I now have opened up my practice to do more keynote speaking in the new year because we're coming back together in community, which I prefer. It brings out the best in me.
Yeah, fantastic. And you let it slip there, or you said it quickly. There's got to be a whole story there. The fact that you rode your bike, not only did you get back on your bike, but you rode it across the country. And I know I think you've ridden in Europe. So the bike has become is part of your life again. When you thought it was gone forever, and you were hoping you would just be able to walk without difficulty. So fantastic recovery there.
Yeah, it was a really great trip. So I was able to like, small steps, just like small practices, eventually get regain my fitness. I got back to racing. Although my risk tolerance definitely had changed. So I wasn't really mixing it up with like the final sprints, but I was technically still pinning a number on and competing and living life. And 2022, less than a year after my total knee replacement, my wife drove the RV with our two dogs, and I rode across the country from Astoria, Oregon to Washington, D.C. It was epic. In 2023, I rode my bike across New York State, which was one of those bucket list things, from Buffalo,
Yeah.
right? And we'll bring it back to Western New York to New York City. That was fantastic. And in 2024, the big cycling to do is a race called Unbound XL, which is in Kansas, the Flint Hills of Kansas. It's 350 miles of gravel,
Oh,
and they give you 35 hours to complete the race. So that's probably the granddaddy of gravel events in the US. And so I am taking that one on. It's like I don't know what to expect. It will definitely be the longest race I've ever done in my life. And but my feeling is like, hey, listen, um, be more afraid of not living than dying, and like embrace
mm,
life, get messy, get dirty, trip, stumble, fall, find a way to get back up again. Your scars tell this wonderful story that you're doing this thing called life. And I think we live in a time to really embrace that. I think this can be a moment where people look at it, it's like, oh, it's too crazy, it's overwhelming, I'm anxious, I'm gonna curl up, and that can happen. And when it happens, we need to provide care for each other. I also think it's a moment to say, okay, how do I like lean in to the uncertainty? How do I lean into this moment? How do I see this as an inflection point that can change how we work together and how we live together, and really determine like what do we value? And I think we need to be engaged in that conversation, because we are going through a messy time, and it's up to all of us to weigh in and say, this is what we value about living and community and being together. And I want to be an active participant in that.
awesome, man. I love the grittiness. I mean, I can't imagine a more gritty, dirty ride than a 350-mile gravel ride. It brings all the images up of riding across cobbles that you see the tour riders do, and
Yeah.
covered head to toe in mud and just grime and grinding it out. I love that gritty mindset. It's super awesome, man. Michael, what's next for you, man? What are you excited about going into the new year for coaching or for your profession, what you're working on?
Yeah, I would say three things. Like, one is doing more keynote speaking now that I've opened my calendar up. So that will be great. This is second year of the app for us. So, the first year we built the foundation. Now the second year we're going to build like the first few floors of it. People love it, and people can come into our app community and pay what they can. So, which is unlike any other app out there. And then, like, on the athletic side of my life is like taking on Unbound XL, and really, yeah, testing myself and getting into that gritty stuff. It's like Paris-Roubaix in Europe,
Mm.
and so like those three things in the first half of the year, I'm pretty pumped about, and we'll see what the second half brings.
What's the name of the app if people want to go find that?
It's really easy. It's called Pause, Breathe, Reflect. You can find it in the App Store or Google Play. And again, you can pay what you can for your first year and really experience a different approach to mindfulness. From it's secular, it's relatable, and I really try to have practices to meet you at whatever moment you happen to be dealing with. And so, really thinking about, corporate people, business people, or people who love to get after it, but can really use a moment just like, all right, let's slow it down, let's breathe, and let's be thoughtful about how I want to move forward.
Awesome. Fantastic. Where can people find you, Michael, and keep up with your work?
Probably the best place is either michaelobrienshift.com. That's my executive coaching and speaking website, or pause, breathe, reflect.com. So either one of those, you can find out a little bit more about me and connect with me. And from a social media perspective, the two platforms I'm on more frequently would be LinkedIn, because I'm a leadership coach, and Instagram, because I come from the city of Kodak. So I just like to take photos.
Right on. I love it. Michael, it's been a great conversation, man. Thanks so much for sharing so
Yeah.
openly, and love the conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Eric, thanks again for having me on. I love what you're doing. And, you in Texas, me in New Jersey will put good vibes towards Western New York, and hopefully our Buffalo Bills can make it into the playoffs. And who knows, this could be our year.
Hoist that trophy, man. Absolutely. This could be our year. The Buffalo mantra, we love it. And we hope always for the Bills to get to the end. So thanks again, Michael. To our audience, thank you for taking time from your busy day to listen. Always appreciate that you do so. Thanks for sharing your day. If you would write a review, give us a rating, share the program with a friend. All those things help us reach a broader audience. Until next time, friends, I'm Eric Sardina, and you've been listening to the Return to Authenticity podcast. And bye for now.